Hi, thanks for stopping by. In this video, I'm going to do a book review on a book that I read a long time ago, actually, that was recommended to me by a fellow colleague of mine, and that is A Thrice Told Tale by Marjorie Wolf. The thing that stood out to me about this, and it's something that I could talk for hours on, but I'm not going to, is this concept of telling stories. Marjorie Wolf writes this book, and the title is a bit of a giveaway in terms of A Thrice Told Tale. She writes this book in 3 sections, and each section of the book looks at this story that she's telling from 3 different perspectives. So the first is a written text, the story. Second is very much driven by the notes that she gathers in the field when she takes her research. And the third is a social science article which was published later on. She writes all 3 at different times, and they all have different outcomes as such from the stories and the experiences that are achieved within the story. So 3 sections about the same event, the same story, told 3 different ways. The premise of the story is based from Wolf's experiences working in a very small village in Taiwan when she did her research, and it is a story from 3 different perspectives that's about a young mother who behaved or started to behave in a very strange, aberrant way, being suicidal, and her opinion in the village where she lived started to change and divide over the reason as to why she was starting to behave like this. There were questions over, was she becoming a shaman? Was she possessed by a god? Or was she deranged? Did she need physical restraint, drugs, hospitalisation? Or was it that she was being cynically manipulated by a husband of hers to elicit sympathy and money from the neighbours? So 3 very different outcomes as to what people thought. Now, as we move through the story, through the book, through the 3 different perspectives, we see in each of them that the woman is taken away from the area she's living into her mother's house in a different, I guess we'd call a town or a district. For some people, this settled the matter, settled the questions, settled the lack of understanding around her behaviour. But for other people, that made it worse. For other people in the village, they started to debate her behaviour even more so. And we never actually truly find the answer. For a story to read as a viewer and to not have an ending made me a little irritated, but we never know, and I guess that's something that I'm going to talk about in a second about stories. But the first text is important to connect to the perspectives of each of these, because the first text was written very shortly after the incident, after the behaviour and the experiences of this young woman, which when the book was written was over 30 years ago. The second was a copy of the field notes collected about the events that happened in that story. And the third, as I said earlier, was an article published in the American Ethnologist, which is a journal which analyses the incident from the author's current perspectives all this time later. So we're looking at the same story from 3 different perspectives and 3 different sets of time. And within that, Wolf provides a very useful commentary around the ideas of feminism and postmodern criticisms of ethnography, around her research, the types of research she was doing, and her methods. But it's a very interesting book. It's very much a promotion of self-reflection, self-reflexivity as a researcher and a practitioner, and she draws on some key theory within that. So that's a bit about what the book was provided me with, really. But I think I could talk, as I said, for hours about a concept of story. Me as currently aligning with, being an interpretivist researcher, storytelling is my world, my life, my research. But also being an early years practitioner and having that through and through ingrained within me, we can't not tell stories. We work with children who give us stories, who help us experience stories on a daily basis. So stories are powerful. And I know I work a lot with my students around storytelling and the power of stories when we think about inclusivity methods and we think about children's unique needs and having a children's voice heard. But often when we think about stories, something that really struck me about Woolf's perception of these stories was that they don't have to be perfect. But that got me thinking, how often do we tell a story without a solid ending? I don't think that sits comfortably with people. And as a researcher, myself, involved in people's experience in phenomenology, not knowing the truth, not knowing the ending, not knowing the key kind of outcome is a really strange thing. But it did get me thinking about how often do we actually, in our lives, know the ending to a story unless it's in the past. Our current story, our current life, our current processing, if we own the story of our life, we get to rewrite the ending. And that's something that I heard Brene Brown say a while back. And I like that idea that, our life is an ongoing story. But if we own that story, we get to write the ending. Otherwise, the story owns us. It happens to us. And again, this got me thinking about the first of these texts, which is the story kind of narrative. And I think it's quite clear, and I don't think Woolf shies away from this. In telling the story of this event, a lot of the gaps are being filled, and I think Woolf does that intentionally to make it read and feel like a story. Possibly some assumptions made there and some views of other people that she didn't necessarily have the evidence for. But there is a need to be mindful of this interpretivist approach with this research that she's drawing on, is that we have a responsibility of recalling other people's stories. And again, I can make a connection here to early years in terms of the voice of a child, the importance of listening to children. And for me, stories are a great way to do that, whether they are stories using puppets, stories using resources, creative expressive arts, or whether it's a conversation. That actually we have a responsibility as humans, as individuals, to tell our story and to recall the stories of other people. We learn from stories, and some of the greatest lessons in life that I don't think I'm the only one speaking here on behalf of this, that actually I've learned is through the stories of other people and the stories that I've told of my experiences. So we have this responsibility, and I truly believe that, especially working with children, we need to give people the voice to tell these stories, whether we are telling them on behalf of other people or allowing them to tell them themselves. But if we're telling them on behalf of other people, we need to be mindful, just as Woolf had to in this book, as to how we fill in those gaps, how we naturally paint the picture ourselves, even though we weren't there and experienced it. So that's something quite significant that I took from this book. Another one is the importance of recognising the different perspectives of an event or truth. Now, as you said, Woolf looks at this story from 3 different angles. And this got me thinking to an experience I've had lately with my daughter. And she asked me if she could do something, I can't remember what it was now. And I'd said no, and I told her why. And I got a text actually that said, "Oh, well, that's not fair." And so we had a conversation about it anyway. And the point that I'm trying to get to is it made me realise how often do we go into a conversation only bringing our perspective. And actually, how often do we not get the answer we want back? Do we not get the response that we were expecting? So what can we take from that? Well, if we're thinking about engaging in a conversation, engaging in discussion, telling somebody's story, we need to be really mindful, we need to be critical with our thinking, to look at it from every perspective. And for some people, that might be a normal thing you do. But is it a conscious thing you do all the time? I think there's a lot to learn when we think think with empathy, and we approach things with empathy, approach people with empathy. But we can only really draw on that empathy if we can think about things from their perspectives. Think about, walking in somebody else's shoes. And whenever we're recalling a story, an experience, a learnt point, a journey, something we've read, something we've seen. All of those are stories that we need to be really mindful as to the spin that we're putting on them. And recognising that spin as well in other things we see. We all experience life very differently, I believe. Therefore, the stories we tell are never going to be the same. 3 different people, 100 different people watching the same video, anyone watching this video clip, you will take from it very different things to other people. So again, when we're recalling stories and responsibility of recalling stories of other people, we need to be mindful of that. Something else that I took from this story, this book by Woolf, is the importance of keeping a log of some type, some sort, around experiences. And actually this is what I'm doing through my YouTube videos. They're there to keep a log of what I was thinking at the time and sharing that with like-minded people. But something Woolf does in her second text was draw on her field notes. And as a researcher, I use field notes. Probably don't rely on them as much as I should. Probably don't use them as well as I should, but we're all learning. And that's something I'm very conscious of. But keeping a log of our thoughts, our developments, our story, our journey is really important, and something that I am starting to do myself a lot more, and my husband's starting to do, and some of the people I know. Because actually we can look back. When we look back on an experience, on a story, on a part of our life, we look back at it through the lens that we're at now. Even if we can recall an experience, we are looking at it through a lens of now, and we are different people now than we were then. But actually, if we can evidence it, we can journal it, we can write things down, we can make scrapbooks, we can, whichever way it is you use to document your life, your story, your journey, we can go back and use those as hard evidence to try and remove some of our view on perspective on it from now. So that's something that I thought was quite important that I took from Woolf's book here. And 2 final points before I draw this together. The use of field notes for me as a researcher are invaluable. They are part of a jigsaw, and I was thinking, what's the equivalent for people that aren't engaged in research? And for people who work with children, actually those sticky notes that you will leave yourself, those little notes in children's learning journeys, the wow moments, the conversations, they are all part of a jigsaw puzzle, part of a mosaic, if you will, that brings together a bigger picture when we can't remember it, when the story we're telling is hazed through the lens of now. Actually, those bits of field notes, those bits of memories, those evidences are really vital to draw together. And finally, recognising the importance of self-reflection and reflexivity when we're exploring the story or lived experiences of ourselves or of other people. To what extent do we choose to hear them, live them, and learn from them? Even as you're watching this, or you're watching any other video or YouTube content, or any other platform for that matter, as I said, you're approaching it from your perspective, from your lived phenomena. But to what extent do you choose to hear what I'm saying? What extent do you choose then to do with that information? What are you going to take from it? Whether you're going to share it, you're going to comment, speak back to me. What are you going to do with that? And we need to be mindful, just as Woolf has been in the final chapter, more specifically, connecting and drawing upon that self-awareness. Doing it actively, not passively. How can my self-awareness, my self-perception of me, influence how I'm interpreting this information? Am I getting in my own way? Am I not being able to process something, or am I getting stuck in a mindset about what you're trying to tell me or what this is trying to show me? So being mindful of who we are as we absorb information, as we listen to stories, as we tell stories, as we reshare stories, is really important. And that's something that I think I learned a lot from Woolf's book. It is a bit of a tricky read. For those of you not familiar with some of the terminology in there around feminism and postmodernism, but in terms of the value and in terms of the messages that have come from, I would definitely recommend it. And if you want to, I'll put some links in the comments below the video if you want to grab a copy. But it's definitely worth a read, and for researchers' perspective, it's definitely worth some good connections there in a third, specifically, and in a commentary around some of the challenges she faced being an ethnographic researcher, especially in the time and as a woman that she was. And that feminist angle is really interesting as well. And whenever we think of stories, again, as I said, that self-reflection element, for me, gender comes into that. So that feminist argument for me was an additional bonus thread throughout it too. Okay, so I think I would definitely recommend it. It would be great to hear what you thought. If anyone's read it, or if you go on to read it, please drop me a comment. And if you like the video, share it around, and it'd be great to hear your thoughts. These videos are a way of me sharing what I've learned and taking from it to consolidate my learning, but I know others are doing the same too. So subscribe, and I hope to speak to you soon. Thanks for stopping by.